Good evening. How are you? I guess we are maintaining our time. Such a pleasure to be here in Bangalore, especially coming from Silicon Valley. There are lots of similarities between Silicon Valley and Bangalore, right? I'm sure you know most of the things in terms of entrepreneurship, the number of engineers, the number of artificial AI engineers, machine learning engineers, and so on and so forth. But two things that caught my attention. One is Bangalore is a place where distance is measured by the units of time, which, by the way, is very similar in Silicon Valley as well. And the second thing is Bangalore and Silicon Valley perhaps contributes the maximum amount to the respective states. Yet, every time when I come to Bangalore or when I live in Silicon Valley, it almost feels like no money is being invested in infrastructure. You agree with that? Are you agreeing? Or? Yes. So there's something not right from the point of view of where the money is being generated and where the money is being invested. And somehow I think we got to figure out how we could improve the infrastructure, both here, of course, even in Silicon Valley as well. Because even in Silicon, like today, for example, the distance from our house to this place was just about 11 kilometers. And my nephew who came with me, it took about an hour and 5 minutes, and he said it's actually the fastest that we could reach. So 10, 11 kilometers, and we managed to reach this place in just about an hour or so, which, by the way, is not uncommon even in Silicon Valley as well. But having said that, it's always fascinating to see the excitement, the entrepreneurship, innovation, the energy that Bangalore has today. And it always fascinates me. Before I went to US, I was in Bombay. Back then it was called as Bombay, and today it is called Mumbai. And I stayed in Bombay studying for 2 years, and then I also worked in Bombay for about 2 years before I went to Silicon Valley back in 1982. And I always used to tell my friends that people in India, they have to go and spend at least 2 years living in Bombay, because that kind of sets you, gets you ready for the rest of your life, especially during your younger days. If you get to live in Bombay for about 2 years, you can perhaps live in any part of the world. And today, I would say to my colleagues, my friends, and everyone outside of India to come and visit Bangalore, experience the entrepreneurship energy and everything that's going on here, and get charged up. And I'm so fortunate that this conference actually is happening 3 or 4 days before I'm heading back to Silicon Valley. And I'm really charged up, talking to all the entrepreneurs and everything that's going on in this place. I'm really, really excited, and hats off to the ecosystem that exists today, the venture capitalists, the TIE, and of course the entrepreneurial community, right, which is thriving so well, and people taking the risk to start very, very, very innovative companies. And that would not have happened 25, 30 years ago. So that's the greatest change that I'm observing today, and it's really fascinating, and I'm honored to be here to present my thoughts on some of these future trends in the technology as I see it, because I do invest in many of the next generation of entrepreneurs and technologies. So I would just love to share with you my thoughts. I just want to make sure that all of us are on the same page. So any technology that is built problems that are being solved, do you agree that technology has the power to make everyone's life better? It has to be everyone, not just to a segment of people. You agree with that? Right? Whatever we do, whatever innovation that we do, whatever disruption that we all do, it has to impact everyone's life. That is when you feel good about it, right? And if you look at the changes that are happening today, and it's fascinating actually every time when I come here, the payments aspect of it, the revolution that has happened in India, I've not seen this even in the US as well, right? I can buy coconut water, and I can pretty much pay, the street vendor with my phone. I mean, that has not happened even in the US. Kudos to the UPI, kudos to the RuPay, kudos to everything, the back-end infrastructure that has been done in the last 5 or 7 years. It's absolutely remarkable. It only tells that it's just the beginning of the technology innovation, technology disruption that a common man can appreciate. And in fact, this coconut vendor, if I give him the cash, he would rather not take cash. He would rather get the money paid through the phone. That's when you realize how technology has benefited a common man. So obviously, we are seeing many of these new technologies impacting several sectors. And in technology, what I have seen is typically history always repeats. So what you see in the past, in some form or the other, it just keeps coming back. And if you look at the last decade, right, the social, mobile, cloud created a lot of these wonderful companies that solve the problem. So the question that you always get, was everything predicted? So just to give you an example, in 2008, cloud was considered as a snake oil. Snake oil really means it's like a marketing gimmick. Cloud in 2008 was actually considered as a snake oil. And in 2018, obviously when everybody has adapted cloud as the way how we live our lives, so it got removed from the Gartner hype cycle in 2018. So just to set the context that prediction is one thing and reality is another thing. So with that in mind, so if you ask the crystal ball about what the future defining technologies of the future is going to look like, okay, I've picked obviously the AI, IoT, and the blockchain, which is very relevant to this conference as well, along with many other things, but I feel 80 to 90% of the innovation that's going to happen is going to be centered around this, because this is where massive disruptions can be done. Because each one is as massive as what happened in 1995, which is the internet revolution. Each one can bring the disruption in the way how we all lead our lives. So I'm really excited about the impact of these three things coming together. So let's just take a look at an example when these three things actually come together. So I just want you to visualize and stretch your imagination a little bit beyond what we normally think. So an example like this, where hospitals, call centers, automobiles, a lot of these things are connected through these devices and these technologies. If we can visualize that if we want to get a doctor's appointment, it's actually a nightmare. I mean, even in the US, it's not easy at all. To get a doctor's appointment, it's an absolute nightmare. So what if we can switch this whole thing where there are sensors that today we can all wear, which detects a lot of our body parameters. And these sensors with the AI can start to detect what is happening in my body, and using the blockchain can send a message to my doctor, because the doctor now knows the message actually came from the right person. Somebody else has not faked it. Okay? And the AI would sort of start to predict some of the possibilities of what can go right or go wrong and set the appointment, and someone from the doctor's office calls you, or when you go, the appointment is set. So visualizing something like this with these technologies being integrated, which is not there today, but potentially we can start envisioning how our own lives can be impacted in a positive way, right, when these technologies are integrated. If you look at the 2021 Gartner hype cycle, this is pretty fascinating because the Gartner hype cycle sort of sets the trend by observing many of the underlying technologies that are emerging in this world. And the key thing to watch are the light blue ones, which is typically the ones that is going to happen in the next 2 to 5 years. So that means there is a lot of experimentation that's going on. Some of these things are already proven. So the one that is at the peak is the NFT, which is the non-fungible token. So let's not go there, but there is a lot of excitement actually that's going on in the non-fungible tokens where, in fact, I know several companies that are trying to create these NFT, the tokens for Bollywood, the tokens for cricket, right? Tokens for soccer. So there is lots of these things. And it's not very different compared to what we are already used to, like a airline, the numbers that we all have, right? So you can actually use that to go buy, when you have accumulated X number of these account numbers, you can go buy lots of things outside of, if you don't want to use this for buying tickets. So the same way, this NFT, of course, the whole back-end infrastructure needs to be developed for these things to trade and exchange and all of those things. And the other things in the business side that is happening, which is the data fabric and decentralized identity and AI augmented software engineering. So these are some of the things where you want to sort of unify the data that is being generated through thousands of sources. You want to make sure the data fabric environment of it sort of like collects all these things, and there is a standardization as to how data is being collected. So there is technologies that are being developed where the data fabric that helps the standardization of the data that is being generated by thousands of these sensors and other things. And decentralized identity. Identity has always been typically looked at from a centralized perspective. And centralized poses a lot of challenges, security issues, scaling issues, and so on and so forth. So how do you start giving the same level of security, but in a more distributed manner? And AI augmented software engineering, which is as software is being developed, you want to provide more and more of AI ability to test this software, because software is going to be used in very, very, very complex environment. We cannot afford for this software to even fail. So it should be almost like a semiconductor, right? So the same level, software has to be tested. So the only way you can test all these things is by creating artificial intelligence testing methodologies and processes that helps this software to be like completely vetted out. The next one, which is very exciting, which has a huge impact on human life, is this generative AI, generative artificial intelligence. This is where, and I'll show you a couple of slides later on, this is where the diseases that can be detected through the human genomes that can be sequenced today much, much faster and much cheaper. And applying this generative AI, you can detect the next generation of the medicines to solve pretty much any kind of problems. So these are some of the areas where there is a lot of excitement that's going on. Of course, there is a lot of other things as well. But the way to look at this especially, I was actually looking at the whole stack, the emergence of the stack from a historical perspective. So the way how technologies evolve is at the bottom you have these foundational technologies, which include infrastructure, compute, and various kinds of things, right? That actually make networking and so on and so forth. Those are the things that really make things work. And then comes the middle layer, which is like an intermittent layer. And then you have enormous amount of applications that really run on top of this to solve the world's problems. So 80 to 1995, you saw desktop applications, and you have Oracle, SAP, and these kind of companies that solve the database issues, and then on-premise infrastructure like Cisco, Sun Microsystems, and so on and so forth that created the products. Then from 95 to 2010, with the evolution of the internet, you got the web apps, and you got the middle layers like the Hadoop and the MongoDB, and so on and so forth. And then the foundation technologies start to become on-premise and the cloud. But today, things are moving very differently. So at the application level, you have completely distributed applications. Web 3.0 is what everyone is talking about, right? Which takes advantage of the blockchain and security and so on and so forth. And then in the middle layer, you have the containers, the data lakes, and so on and so forth. And at the bottom foundational level, everything is getting more and more centered around. Even if an enterprise builds their own data center, it will still be run like a cloud. So cloud becomes the underlying foundational technology to really provide unlimited compute, storage, network capability for any of the things that happen on the top to run. So of course we all know the impact of AI. It pretty much touches every segment of the society, every segment of the application. There's nothing that is being untouched, and even as we move forward over the next 5 to 10 years, literally we will start seeing the impact of this AI over the next decade or so. And the good news from AI acceptance perspective, a lot of countries, including India, essentially accepted and wrote the policies to have AI, because AI can be used for good purpose and AI can be used even for bad purpose as well. So countries were very hesitant to bring AI into the mainstream, but a lot of companies over the last 5 to 6 years have adapted the AI policies. And from a startup perspective, you can look at, obviously, USA has almost 1,300 companies in the artificial intelligence, and in India, this is as of 2021, so obviously these numbers are changing pretty rapidly. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of startup companies are solving the problems that I just showed in the previous slide. This is the famous slide of Andrew Ng, where it talks about the fact that the more data that can be collected, the more data that you can use to predict, to run your AI and machine learning algorithms, you can get to this neural network sort of concept where the predictability gets better and better and better. So today, with all these IoT sensors, which are so inexpensive, pretty much can be deployed across everything in this world, including a light, air conditioner, anything you want, right? Today you can very easily deploy these IoT sensors, which helps to generate the right amount of data and the right size of the data as well, which helps to create these neural networks. Now, I just want to take an example. How many of you are tennis fans here? How many of you watch tennis regularly? So this is an example of a real-life situation that happened in January 2022 in the Australian Open. So the scenario in the Australian Open finals was, the final match was between Rafael Nadal and Daniel Medvedev. And in this match, The interesting part was that 2 sets, Medvedev had won. And in the third set, with Nadal serving, he was losing at 0-40. And at this time, when AI algorithms were run, 96% of the predictions, AI predictions, basically said Daniel Medvedev was going to win. Guess what? In the end, Medvedev lost and Nadal won. So the point I'm trying to make here is, it will still be so much more data and many more years before AI can predict the human behavior. So that's the good news. I think humans can still beat the algorithms and compute at any point of time, right? So let's continue to pursue that. Our brains are sharper than this one. The other challenges with the AI, one of the things that people were concerned about AI is the surveillance of the government. And people think that this is something that happened in China, but let me tell you, this is something that happened, actually in Florida, right? So the street cameras and other things that are being deployed, and also there was a protest at Google when Google had agreed to do a Pentagon AI project, and there was a lot of protest amongst employees, and Google eventually had to withdraw. So the good news is that companies that want to essentially work on these kind of projects, right, they need to be very open about everything that they are doing so that people are aware, right, these technologies, and then they can express their opinion. And Google had to eventually withdraw doing this project for Pentagon. So the next phase of this AI is essentially with 4 important things: sense, comprehend, act, and the feedback. So sense is the computer vision, audio processing, and other sensors. Comprehend is the natural language processing. And act is the infer, recommend, and delegate your responsibilities. And then feedback is learn and adapt continuously. So integrating these things into the next generation of the AI solutions will make the AI to be a lot more user-friendly and user-accepted as well. Especially people who cannot express in English language, right? It's very important that technologies evolve to adapt all kinds of situations. So what are some of the inhibitors for the AI adoption? So one is data labeling. So to be able to actually tell what each token is or what each item is, and then obtaining massive training data sets. So getting all these massive data sets is a big problem. And even if you get the data sets, getting the right kind of data is the most important thing, because there is a lot of garbage that is being collected today. And explainability of the problem and learning generalizability, which basically means that you should be able to explain why you are doing what you're doing. So we have challenges in explaining a lot of these things because things are not as intuitive as we want it to be. So the next big technology, you see this octopus, which is the blockchain. Once again, this is another technology that touches every aspect of our life, and barely we have scratched the surface in many of these things that I talk about here. So obviously at the core, you have the digital identity, the smart contract, and digital assets, and distributed applications. So if you take, for example, some of the myths about the blockchain, a lot of people think blockchain is nothing but a Bitcoin, and blockchain is better than a traditional database. Blockchain is immutable or tamper-proof, and blockchain is 100% secure, and blockchain is a truth machine, right? These are some of the myths, but the reality is quite different. Bitcoin just happens to be yet another application of blockchain. and the database is a distributed database, right? So there is a lot of reality versus the myth in the blockchain technology that still needs tremendous amount of education for the people. Even some of the leaders, great investors in this area, even they are forming opinion in terms of centralized operation versus distributed operation, right? So, companies like Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, and the monopoly, which is a centralized way of how doing things, it is a clear depiction that these poses tremendous amount of challenges. So people are saying, hey, you have to move more from centralized into distributed sort of environment. Now, having said that, the other two leaders, one is this Reid Hoffman, who is the founder of LinkedIn, and the other one is Peter Thiel. Peter basically says, crypto is a libertarian and AI is communist. Whereas Reid Hoffman says, crypto is anarchy and AI is the rule of law. Okay, so point is that these opinions are still being debated about these technologies, which is actually good. So a couple of use cases where many of these companies are, especially for sending the data from place A to place B in a very, very secured manner so that you know that this is the person who is actually sending the data. So lots of companies are using this blockchain technology in some of these applications, if not all. So these are some of the examples. The record keeping and transactions, these are some of the examples of blockchain applications that are being used today. And one of the companies that we have, which is the Arna Networks, is basically providing 5G kind of solutions. And 5G, as many of you have heard, provides the low latency technology. And it's a very, very important aspect, especially when you want to provide real-time applications, right? Especially in medical applications and other places, manufacturing and all. So here is an example of how 5G technologies are being used on a manufacturing floor. And that way, every equipment on the manufacturing floor could be connected to the network, and you can control these equipments using the 5G technology. So some of the examples in blockchain and AI. So obviously, we talked about blockchain, where fraud is one of the most important applications. So detection of the fraud is the biggest and simplest way to apply blockchain. So one of the applications is degree certificates. So when you get a degree and when you send that degree for your higher education, it's very easy to tamper with that degree. And this is where blockchain comes into play, that the college that sends or the individual that sends, this is guaranteed when it reaches the destination that it is the right person that has sent the degree certificate. And then you have property document frauds. And especially in a country like India, property fraud is very, very common. I mean, those of you who have seen this movie, Khosla Ka Ghosla, right? Khosla Ka Ghosla, in fact, we were actually one of the victims as well. Exactly a similar kind of thing that happened to us, where the same land was being registered for multiple users. So all those things can be avoided. And of course, it requires tremendous amount of attention and support from the government. Couple more minutes, that's it. Yeah, industrial IoT is another application, and conversational AI, as we talked about earlier. So there's a lot of conversational AI where using the voice and recognizing the voice to essentially apply for call center applications, so bring the intelligence and natural language processing as well. The other one is the challenges that we see here, which is the promise is autonomous cars, but what was during the testing, what was proven was the fact that if you have these black spots on that stop sign, the car actually accelerated. Okay, the other one is, this is one of the companies that I have funded called Headspin, and the user experience and the user interface within the automobiles of the next generation has to be as simple and as easy to use as a mobile phone today. So a lot of technologies are being developed within these automobiles to get that level of user experience. So the cost per human genome is dramatically dropping even compared to the Moore's law. And what that helps is the human body can be sequenced at the most cost-effective manner. So that means it costs very, very less to do the human genome. And same way, the machine learning performance also outstrips the Moore's law. So the result of that is applying this enormous amount of data to detect the molecules that are required to create the next generation of the medicines for various problems that perhaps maybe humans have not even attempted till date. So you could possibly start addressing the various diseases, right, that a lot of our kith and kin have been affected. A lot of those things could be impacted with this new technology. And that's where investments are being done. So the next level is in the neuroscience area, where the brain and the computer simulation can be very easily understood. So applications like type by thinking or the understanding the human and applying that to build the right kind of models so that blind people and ADD people and such things like that could be applied using these technologies. Obviously, these are way ahead, 10 to 20 years from now, but the fact of the matter is the data that is being provided, both on the genomic side as well as on the machine learning side, right, it actually helps to implement many of these much, much, much faster. So the challenges is in the AI ML skills gap, and obviously India can play a very important role in providing the necessary skill set. So there's lots of other technologies, promising technologies, gene editing, synthetic biology, nanotechnologies, 3D printing, NFT tokenization, metaverse, AR, VR, quantum computing, smart devices, robotics. Lots of these things are in the horizon over the next decade or so. And, oops. The result of this is, if you look at how the world is changing between 2001 and today from a market cap perspective. So back in 2001, GE, Microsoft, Exxon, Citi, Walmart, these were the top 5 companies. But today, it's all technology-driven companies. Apple, Alphabet, Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, right? These are all the companies that are, and Tesla, and how the world is actually changing and the impact of the technology. So the world is a better place if technology works for everyone. I mean, that's what we agreed upon. And it is the job of the entrepreneurs to make that happen, right? All of us together can make this happen, and let's go make that change happen. So I'm very excited about the next decade and look forward to working with you. Thank you.